So welcome everyone along tonight. My name is Darren Morton, if you don't know me. I'm the Director of the Lifestyle Medicine Health Research Centre here at Avondale. And this is a special presentation by Dr. Lillian Kent. This presentation is actually part of the class for those of you who are doing the Lifestyle Medicine postgraduate course. But we have some others too that are joining us, and just want to say that you're more than welcome. And if you like what you hear and you'd like to learn more about it, you might like to think about doing a master's in lifestyle medicine, and you'd be very welcome. So nice to have you all along joining us. Let me just tell you a little bit about a little before we start. She's based in sunny Melbourne. As you can see, the sunshine streaming through the window there. Wish it was here at Cooranbong. But Lil's actually a really good friend from, actually, I don't even know, Lil, how long this goes back now, but
2013.
Was it 2013 that you came to Avondale? So it was I suppose, employed as a researcher here at Avondale, and then during her period that she was here, I think it was 5 years, she got roped into helping me to create this course, and so she was actually one of the foundational lecturers in the first ever cohort, and for several years after that for the lifestyle medicine course. And she is, I would say, well, there's heaps of things I could say about Lillian, but she is a quintessential foodie. I will say that. She loves healthy nutrition, and she's certainly a key expert in that space. I really she likes hiking, and I've gone on lots of, one of our favorite things is we go to conferences in different parts of the world, and then we get to explore some of the paths around that. And I remember on one time we were doing one track, and I really wanted to get to the end of it, and everyone else was like, oh no, I don't think we're going to get there. And so I said, I'm just running. So anyway, I went there and I ran. I thought, oh, I'll catch them on the way back. And I got to the top, and I just turned to head back down. I looked up, and there's Lil coming over the crest. Everyone else had bailed. So she's got a lot of gumption, a lot of go. But anyway, she's a really good friend too. So today she's going to be presenting to us on this topic of inflammation and oxidative stress. Big words, but I'm sure that she'll be presented in a way that will be accessible to us all. And so it's really nice to have you back here presenting for us, Lil, and taking this module in the unit. And I'll hand it over to you.
Now, Darren, can you just tell me, can you see my front page there?
I can see it now.
Oh, you can see it. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. I will now start. Where is the... Should this be in present? Okay. Yep. Cool. All right. Okay. All right. Oh, how do I get rid of this? Head. Minus. Yeah. All right. Thank you, my son. Okay. Hi, everybody. Hopefully, we'll get through all this, and you'll have a better understanding of oxidative stress and inflammation and what role they play in the development of chronic disease, and which one is actually the precursor. Is it inflammation? Is it oxidative stress? And by the end of the presentation, you might have an inkling as to what causes what and what leads to what. Anyway, the occurrence of inflammation has been known for about 2,500 years, when Celsius, the Greek physician, first described the heat and redness, pain and swelling that occurs when you have an injury or an infection or an onslaught of some kind. In this acute inflammation, cytokines and chemokines, these are simply messengers of the innate immune system. They're secreted to fight the offender, as well as trigger changes in the vasculature to allow for the immune cells of the innate immune system, which are the macrophages, the monocytes, the dendritic cells, the neutrophils, to come in and join the fight. This innate or this acute inflammatory process, it's important for wound healing, after a physical or chemical injury, and after a pathogen attack. It flares up quickly and then returns the body to a state of homeostasis. And this is important because ongoing inflammation can actually damage the body. So also in this, we see reduced mobility, and this happens from the swelling and the pain. And this actually is designed to make us stop and rest. So it's a protective mechanism while the fight is going on and the healing then goes on that follows. If the inflammatory response can't deal with injury or infection, it then brings in the big guns. And this is the adaptive immune system, the T and B cells. This whole process is a natural physiological need of the body to protect itself. These products of inflammation can damage tissue. So it's important, as I said, that inflammation should switch off when the issue is resolved. But this doesn't always happen. And so you see on the right-hand side of this diagram, we have a different state of inflammation. If the inflammatory process continues unnecessarily, i.e. it's poorly regulated, it's prolonged or inappropriate, a chronic or low-grade smoldering inflammation results. This is a silent inflammation because you really don't know what's going on in the body. It produces a state of allostasis, which is a compensatory physiological mechanism that ultimately impairs health, reduces longevity, and accelerates aging. So in this process, you have a circular reaction of meta-inflammation or inflammation, this low-grade inflammation, producing insulin resistance, producing oxidative stress, which goes on and on and on to create a dysmetabolism and consequently disease. So this process of switching from pro-inflammatory to anti-inflammatory processes is driven by substances in our body called eicosanoids. These are biologically active lipids that act as signaling molecules. There are pro-inflammatory types that drive the immune and inflammatory process. And there are anti-inflammatory eicosanoids that act to end the process. Overproduction of one and reduced production of the other perpetuates low-grade inflammation. So you can see there are two pathways here. One pathway that goes down the omega-6 fatty acid path to produce arachidonic acid and other acids, and the pathway that starts with omega-3 fatty acids that go down and produce EPA and ultimately DHA. So which pathway occurs is determined by the type of eicosanoid that's produced. So omega-6 produces arachidonic acid and omega-3 produces EPA and DHA. So as I said, omega-6 is converted to arachidonic acid, and this is part of the pro-inflammatory cascade. On the other hand, omega-3 fatty acids produce EPA and DHA, as we saw in the previous diagram, and this is involved in the anti-inflammatory cascade. The omega-3 fatty acids reduce the activation of nuclear factor kappa B or NF-kappa B. Now, NF-kappa B, we'll see this arise again and again throughout this presentation as we go through discussing inflammation and oxidative stress. NF-kappa B is a key driver of the inflammatory response. It also, reduction of this protects DNA from oxidative damage, reduces intracellular ROS, and increases various antioxidant enzymes. If too much omega-6 fatty acids are in the diet, then we move to a more pro-inflammatory cascade as the same enzymes are involved in both pathways. So if we go back to here, you can see that the same enzymes are involved in the omega-6 pathway as well as the omega-3 pathway. But if there's too much omega-6 in the diet, then we will favor this pro-inflammatory pathway. And this is part of the modern Western lifestyle, Western diet. There is far too much omega-6 fatty acids in the diet, through the various oils, the saturated fat, the trans fats that are naturally found in various foods that naturally produce inflammation in the body. And there's a large body of evidence linking reduced omega-3 fatty acids to conditions associated with chronic inflammation. However, you may have heard of EPA and DHA and how important these are, but it would seem that it is the ratio of EPA to arachidonic acid that is more important, because EPA is the only fat that can counteract the eicosanoids derived from arachidonic acid and displace them from the cell membrane. So EPA is important for reducing the inflammatory processes that are driven by omega-6 fatty acids, more so than DHA. So if we look at this diagram, there are a number of papers that have been published that looked at what is the optimal EPA to DHA ratio. And it was found that EPA needs to be in excess of DHA so that this anti-inflammatory process works optimally. And it would seem that a ratio of 2:1 of EPA to DHA is ideal. And in people who are deficient in omega-6, we may actually need as high as a 6:1 ratio of EPA to DHA. And if you're consuming plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids, such as linseeds and walnuts and green leafy vegetables and soybeans, it may be harder to convert DHA, to convert the omega-3 fatty acids into DHA. EPA is more easily produced from these plant-based omega-3 fatty acids. And it was interesting when I was studying nutrition at Deakin Uni, I asked my lecturer, we had a lecture on omega-3 and omega-6, and I asked my lecturer about the production of omega-3 fatty acids in vegetarians and how it is really limited by the plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids. And he said to me, he came to the conclusion that we really need animal sources, particularly from fish, because this is the most common way to get omega-3 fatty acids. But of late, he decided that looking at all the research and looking at the research he was involved in and the other evidence in the literature, he decided that vegetarians, because of their low intake of omega-6 fatty acids, they're probably making adequate amounts of EPA, which is important for low levels of inflammation in the body. So his opinion was, because we don't have the onslaught from alternative pathways, from the saturated fatty acids and so forth, what we're getting from plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids are sufficient. So this chronic inflammatory drive is seen in pretty much every chronic disease that's rampant in our society today and becomes more common as we age. Of the 56.4 million deaths that were reported in 2015, 39.5 or 52% of them were due to chronic diseases. And this is projected to increase to 55 billion by the year 2030. Now, findings from various large studies, including the European EPIC study, found that 80% of type 2 diabetes, 20% of premature heart disease and stroke, and 40% of cancers are preventable. And we will actually know by the end of this presentation what things we can do to help to prevent these diseases. Now, it was once thought that obesity mediated this low-grade inflammation. But if you put 1,000 people on a weight loss program, some will lose a lot and some won't lose any weight whatsoever. We now know that there are different categories or forms of obesity. So when you look at the different variations in lean and overweight and metabolically healthy and metabolically unhealthy, you'll see that about about 60% of people are metabolically normal. Half of those will be lean and half of them will be overweight. And about 40% of people are metabolically unhealthy. A small proportion of those are lean and the major proportion of those are overweight. So overweight does contribute to metabolic health, but not always. Overweight, you can be overweight and still be metabolically healthy. So something else is going on in obesity. It is not just being overweight or obese. 2,500 years ago, as I said, Celsius described acute inflammation, but it was only about 30 years ago that an inflammation was described which didn't involve a pathogen or physical or chemical injury, but rather lifestyle or an environmental trigger and so it was given the name meta-inflammation. This type of inflammation can be associated with obesity, but can also be associated with the factors that cause obesity without getting fat. So if we look at this diagram, you can see that things in our environment, various lifestyle factors such as smoking, overnutrition, excess alcohol, inactivity, pollution, over-exercising, drug use, and so forth, sleep and diet, lead to meta-inflammation or this low-grade chronic inflammation. But many of these don't go through obesity. Some go straight to producing meta-inflammation. And it's this meta-inflammation together with other mechanisms, such as oxidative stress and insulin resistance, that lead to the development of chronic disease. And more recently, we have found that all of this is channeled through the gut microbiota. And you've just had a unit on the gut microbiota, so you should know all about that. And one of my favorite topics is studying the gut microbiota. And I'm a firm believer that your gut microbiome drives the health of your body. If there's dysbiosis, it will contribute to ill health, and a healthy gut microbiome will facilitate good health in us. And you should all know about the mechanisms that are involved in this. Some authors have argued that the development of chronic disease is much broader than what is going on in the body, that there are causes of the causes of this physiological reaction. This slide is just to make you aware of the levels of disease determinants. You'll probably learn more about them in other units, but in this one, we're just focusing on the physiological determinants, which are inflammation and oxidative stress and insulin resistance. So for now, we'll leave inflammation and we'll move on to oxidative stress. Free radicals are molecules that have an unpaired electron. Reactive oxygen species are the main type of free radical, and another type is reactive nitrogen species. Reactive oxygen species, or ROS, is both a natural and normal molecule found in each of us. It's generated as a normal consequence of all forms of aerobic life. In mammals, about 95% of the oxygen that we breathe in is successfully reduced to carbon dioxide and water without the formation of these toxic free radicals. However, the remaining 5% produces ROS or pro-oxidants of various types, including, and you may have heard of some of these, superoxide radical, hydroxyl radical, hydrogen peroxide, peroxynitrate radical, and there are others. ROS is vital for so many processes in the body, including it acts as a signaling molecule to activate and orchestrate the immune response, to eliminate pathogens and digest debris. This is beneficial in the acute inflammatory response, but can cause a lot of damage in chronic inflammation. ROS stimulate an adaptive response so that the organism becomes more resilient. And we see this in plants, which have a bitter taste because of their phytonutrient content. And it's interesting that plants produce antioxidants and phytonutrients to protect them from various onslaughts, even from sunburn, from the sun shining down on them. And these antioxidants that plants produce to protect themselves, turns out that we have been created to also protect us as well. And these ROS also trigger the transcription of antioxidant genes. So they will increase genes that produce antioxidants to counterbalance these pro-oxidants that are produced in the body. And these ROS trigger apoptosis. And apoptosis is simply cell death. If a cell is damaged through oxidative stress, you don't want that cell hanging around, because that cell can actually can replicate in the damaged state. And this is one of the mechanisms by which cancer can form. You want those cells to be destroyed. And ROS is one of the mechanisms that trigger this cell death. And ROS is involved in detoxifying drugs and toxins via the cytochrome P450, which is primarily found in the liver, but also in other cells. And ROS stimulate mitochondrial adaptation to increase respiratory capacity in exercise. So in other words, they stimulate the mitochondria to adapt to improving the ability of the cell to go through the respiratory process, because in exercise, the mitochondria are working hard to convert the oxygen into energy, ATP energy. These pro-oxidants are kept in check, as I said, by antioxidants. It's interesting that each antioxidant has a specific role to either neutralize the free radical, so they act by either neutralizing the free radical or blocking its action. And each antioxidant works at a different stage in the inflammatory process. So we need different types of antioxidants to keep these pro-oxidants from getting out of control. There are two types of antioxidants, those that are endogenous. They are inbuilt in our system. They are produced by the body, and they include superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione peroxidase, and glutathione reductase, and another one called thioredoxin. And there are also exogenous antioxidants, which come principally from our diet. These are non-enzymatic. The other ones in the endogenous, produced by our body, are largely enzymes. But the ones that we take in from diet are non-enzymatic, and they include vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, carotenoids, polyphenols, glutathione, flavonoids, alpha-lipoic acid, and there are others as well. But if the delicate balance shifts in favor of the pro-oxidants, either they're generated at a greater rate, and if the body can't keep up with the demand for antioxidants, we actually go into what's called a redox imbalance. In other words, this is also called oxidative stress. So oxidative stress really is an imbalance of the ability of the body to produce antioxidants to counteract the pro-oxidants that are produced. And the presence of oxidative stress indicates that something has gone wrong, because a body that's functioning well should be able to counteract this. Or a body that is not only going well, but it is given the substances that it needs in the form of antioxidants from external sources, should be able to counter any pro-oxidants produced. So as free radicals have an unpaired electron, they'll steal electrons from all biological molecules. And this is where the problem arises. The most vulnerable molecules are the lipids, proteins, and DNA. The stealing of the electrons disrupts their function and ultimately leads to damage of the entire cell. When the body recognizes that a cell no longer functions as it should, apoptosis or cell death should occur. And this is what you want to happen in the innate immune system. Once the immune cells have come in, eliminated the pathogen, removed the chemical problem or whatever problem that, or the injury, and healed the injury, then you want this system to die down. Now, as we said, chronic inflammation is a driver of many of the diseases or the diseases of our modern time. In fact, all of the diseases of our modern time. But it also turns out that oxidative stress drives the modern diseases of our time. These chronic diseases generally progress slowly, with clinical symptoms only becoming apparent after considerable cellular damage has occurred in target tissues. Research now supports the argument that this damage is largely influenced by biochemical changes associated with this redox imbalance, producing a state of chronic oxidative stress. And it's often accompanied or linked to inflammation. So, as an example, let's just look at the development of atherosclerosis, which happens at the beginning, at the endothelial cell surface of the artery. So this is the endothelium. And we'll see if oxidative stress and or if inflammation are at play here. In the early stages of the disease, LDLs, or as is colloquially called bad cholesterol, these get oxidized. In their native state, they are not oxidized, and they're not a problem if they don't get oxidized. It's only when they get oxidized do they become a problem. Because these oxidized LDL are no longer recognized by the liver for removal, as the native LDL are. But these oxidized LDL increase the motility of monocytes via adhesion molecules on the cell surface of the endothelium. And this allows the migration of these monocytes and the oxidized LDL through the damaged endothelium into the arterial intima. Here, the monocytes differentiate into macrophages, which then internalize the oxidized LDL. They become foam cells, but they will also release pro-inflammatory cytokines and more ROS, which keeps oxidizing LDL, which in turn creates more inflammation. And so the cycle continues. In addition to this, diabetes or metabolic syndrome, hypertension, smoking, and physical inactivity can also damage the endothelium to allow oxidized LDL and immune cells to pass through more readily and exacerbate the process. It's not only LDLs not only undergo oxidation, but they can also be glycated. And glycated LDLs also play a role in the atherosclerotic process. And we'll revisit the glycation of other molecules, including LDL, in a little bit. Interestingly, just as disease increases with aging, so does the telltale signs of aging. Skin that was tight in our younger years becomes thinner, loses its elasticity, begins to sag and wrinkle the older we get. We actually have two ages. There's the chronological age and the metabolic age. So we can actually look younger or older than what our birthday tells us how old we are. And what contributes to this, and how can we delay it? Well, it turns out that oxidative stress is at play here as well, because our skin is continually being exposed to oxidative stress from sun damage and to exposure to oxygen and pollutants in the air. The oxidative stress theory of aging suggests that accumulation of unrepaired oxidative damage at the cellular level is a primary player in what we see in the aging process, both on the outside and inside of us. And indeed, an increase in biomarkers of oxidative damage as well as inflammation are seen in aged tissues. The higher the rate of damage, the faster the aging process and the greater the risk of disease. So a good indicator of how well you are aging is how good you look on the outside for your age. So two indicators of oxidative stress in the skin are lipid peroxidation and DNA damage. If you look at these two graphs, you'll see that oxidative stress-linked tissue damage appears to accelerate at about the age of 60. And that is in most people. As I said, we have our chronological age and we have our biological age. And some people just don't look as old as they are, and some people look much older than they are. And it's all related to their lifestyle. It's interesting that a study was done in Japan amongst 716 women who were on average 43 years of age. And this study actually showed that higher intake of total and monounsaturated fat was associated with increased skin elasticity, and a higher intake of green and yellow veggies was associated with decrease in facial wrinkling. In a subsequent study, these researchers found foods high in vitamin C and omega-3 fatty acids, and remember, omega-3 fatty acids are anti-inflammatory, they reduced the risk of wrinkles. Interestingly, vitamin C has a role in collagen synthesis and the regeneration process and in wound repair, and it is protective of, and it protects the skin from UV damage. On the other hand, diets that were higher in saturated fat and refined carbohydrates were associated with worse skin aging. So we need a continual supply of antioxidants to facilitate the delaying of the aging process. If you do a search of PubMed, you'll find, I just recently did this in the last week or so, where I actually typed in oxidative stress and inflammation. There were over 50,000 hits. And so a glimpse of the results shows that both oxidative stress and inflammation are interrelated and are linked to cancer, cardiovascular disease, neurological conditions. But other results there were also for fatty liver, beta cell dysfunction, insulin resistance, diabetic complications, aging, as I've said, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, atherosclerotic disease, neurodegenerative diseases, liver disease, and kidney disease. So inflammation and oxidative stress, as you can see, is involved in all of the diseases of our modern time. So what came first, inflammation or oxidative stress? Well, excess pro-oxidants are a stimulator of signaling cascades to switch the genes on for inflammation. So in other words, in the majority of cases, it's the oxidant that came first. And this signals the switching on of the genes for inflammation. NF-kappa beta is a protein transcription factor that regulates the innate immune system. It is one of the most main pro-inflammatory switches, and it's stimulated by oxidative stress and imbalance of ROS. The production of free radicals is therefore the primary damaging agent, while the cytokines and acute phase proteins produced by the activated immune cells do not cause direct cellular damage, but they act as signaling molecules to call in more recruits to help in the fight. These recruits then produce more reactive oxygen species to directly eliminate pathogens. So by creating oxidative stress, we produce cell damage, thereby signaling apoptosis. And this is the goal. Once the pathogen is eliminated, any damaged cells, including the pathogen, needs to be destroyed and removed. So let's put all this together. oxidative stress and inflammation together. We saw that lifestyle was related to both of these. They can either go through adiposity or directly be involved in oxidative stress and inflammation to produce free radicals and generate increased production of these free radicals, and also to activate the immune cell and produce the inflammatory cytokines. And both of these processes are interrelated. One triggers the other and the other one triggers the alternative. Both of these processes produce cellular and tissue damage, both in DNA. They increase DNA damage while decreasing the repair of DNA, reduce immune system function, reduce nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is an important vasodilator to make sure that the blood vessels can expand and contract as blood pressure varies. And if that is reduced, the blood vessels become stiffer, so blood pressure increases, and so forth and so forth, ultimately resulting in arterial plaque formation or the formation of atherosclerosis. They're also involved in this tissue damage, increases or reduces insulin sensitivity, increases insulin resistance, and increases blood glucose. And all of those mechanisms work together to increase non-communicable disease. So unhealthy lifestyle work through both oxidative stress and inflammation to produce these chronic diseases that are rampant in our society today. As the pathways contributing to oxidative stress are many, we need a multi-pronged approach to reduce the production of these pro-oxidants. We'll now turn to looking at the different ways that contribute to or ameliorate oxidative stress to reduce the damage chronic exposure can cause. The first thing we'll look at is diet. Firstly, there's energy intake, increased energy intake. Experiment was done where healthy men were fed a high-calorie diet, 6,000 calories a day for a week. And this was shown to produce a rapid increase in the systemic oxidative response. And they actually found that ingestion of energy-dense foods, including cream, ice cream, or sugar, can increase the peroxidation of lipids and reduce the plasma's total antioxidant capacity. So that's the ability of the blood to completely reduce these oxidants through the antioxidants that are present in the body. And this can happen just after 2 to 4 hours of consuming these foods. In your course notes, I've provided a link to an experiment, a little video of an experiment showing how one bowl of ice cream, which is high in fat and sugar, increases oxidative stress. And you might notice, you'll recognize one of the participants in this little experiment. If you have a look at it, it's really interesting. It only goes for about 5 minutes, and I really encourage you to look at that because it may help you to rethink having that bowl of ice cream. So, but interestingly, avocados, on the other hand, which are also high in fat, don't do this, as avocados are also a rich source of antioxidants. So too much energy consumed, particularly in the form of fats and sugars, increase oxidative stress. On the other hand, calorie restriction in obese subjects for just 28 days reduced the peroxidation of lipids. And research has shown that fasting can reduce oxidative damage to DNA and decrease plasma indicators of oxidative damage to lipids, proteins, and amino acids. So people who chronically reduce their calories are actually able to delay their aging and extend their lifespan. And this is what is believed to happen in the Okinawan people of Japan, because they routinely only consume 70% of the calories that their bodies need. Another dietary behavior is the type of protein that you intake, or protein intake per se overall. If you're consuming too much protein, you actually increase your risk of mortality. And it's believed to operate through various aging mechanisms, such as increasing rapamycin, decreasing fibroblast growth factor 21. And if you know of the Nutrition Facts website, Michael Greger's just released a couple of videos on this fibroblast growth factor 21, which are really interesting. So you can see how to actually increase this FGF21 for short, to increase your longevity. Have a look at that video. Also, the mechanisms by which protein increases mortality is through producing more insulin than the body needs, and also increasing insulin-like growth factor. On the other hand, protein restriction decreases ROS, decreases oxidative damage to DNA, and peroxidation to lipids. Now, it's interesting that animal proteins are more important in doing this through various mechanisms, through the saturated fat, trans fat, hemines, because these all are pro-oxidants. Animal proteins also act to increase peroxidation of lipids and decrease plasma antioxidant activity or capacity, because they AGEs, or advanced glycation end products, as well as heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, are produced when meat is cooked. Meat, such as all kinds of meat, poultry, even fish, are cooked at high temperatures, such as frying, grilling, or barbecuing. All of these high temperature cooking methods all produce either AGEs, HCAs, or PHAs. HCAs and PHAs are carcinogenic, and AGEs are actually the non-enzymatic reaction of glucose with protein. So when AGEs are in the body, they not only glycate LDL, as we saw earlier, but they also glycate other lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Nucleic acids in the DNA. But it's not only meats that produce these AGEs in the body. Any foods that have been cooked at high temperatures have the propensity to produce these AGEs. And there are cooking methods that can reduce this, even if you cook at high temperatures. For example, the addition of lemon juice, if you're roasting vegetables, can reduce the production of AGEs. Now, this glycation can occur in anyone, but the effects are more severe in people with type 2 diabetes, as the extent of glycation is dependent on the glucose concentration in the blood and how long the lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids are exposed to this glucose. And as you would expect with type 2 diabetics, these biological molecules are exposed to glucose for longer periods of time because of the inability to control blood sugars. Then we have the dietary glycemic index, which is a ranking of carbohydrates by the extent they raise blood glucose levels after ingestion. Higher glycemic index foods are the ones that increase blood glucose more readily. They produce oxidative stress and inflammation by increasing various pro-inflammatory mechanisms, and also raising the susceptibility of LDL to oxidation, as well as other mechanisms. Higher dietary glycemic index is found in the processed foods. So it's the processed foods, which, as we saw in the previous slide, which are really damaging to our bodies. On the other hand, fruits and vegetables are rich in antioxidants, phytonutrients, and vitamins that have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. These decrease lipid peroxidation, decrease oxidation of LDL, C-reactive protein. Now, C-reactive protein is a protein made in liver that's sent into the circulation in response to inflammation, and it's used in pathology labs as a marker of the amount of inflammation in your body. And it's actually a good indicator of your risk of heart disease. So if your CRP is up, your risk of heart disease is increased. Sorry. Fruits and vegetables also decrease various inflammatory cytokines. So they not only decrease the pro-oxidants, but they also, or the pro-oxidants that can cause oxidative stress, but they also decrease inflammatory cytokines. And they increase the overall capacity of the body to fight these through the amount of antioxidants in the body. Now, there are many ways to assess the quality of the diet. More recently, the Dietary Inflammatory Index has looked at the inflammatory potential of the diet. And this Dietary Inflammatory Index has been linked to cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, and mortality. So the higher the inflammation in the body, in the diet, the greater the risk of these diseases. And we can see this on this scale here. The greater the certain types of foods are more pro-inflammatory, and so as you go down the scale, the higher the pro-inflammatory dietary inflammatory index score is, the greater the production of inflammation, the risk of high blood pressure, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and coronary heart disease. On the other hand, various foods are anti-inflammatory, and we can actually go down the scale to quite high levels. And you can see here that this is a depiction from this paper here of some of the inflammatory capacity of various foods and nutrients. And turmeric, interestingly, in this slide here, has the greatest anti-inflammatory capacity. And so if we look at curcumin, which is the biologically active component of turmeric, we'll see that it is a potent antioxidant. It protects LDL from oxidation. It improves the immune function. It improves liver function by activating key enzymes and antioxidants, which are involved in detoxification. It improves joint health and promotes flexibility. It stimulates bile production and improves digestive function and protects against many of the hallmarks of cancer, such as angiogenesis, proliferation, metastasis, inflammation, and apoptosis. So curcumin can modulate various types of signaling molecules, such as kinases, enzymes, and if you go around, you can see that it's involved in modulating many of these by either upregulating or downregulating them, that are involved both in inflammation and oxidative stress, and all of the positive adaptive processes that go along with that. So it's well worth including turmeric rather than curcumin in your diet, and we certainly do in the foods that I cook at home every day. Now, you've heard me talk about nuclear NF-kappa beta quite a bit. This is a key driver of the inflammatory response and is associated with chronic disease. Curcumin actually interacts directly with the receptor for this NF-kappa beta to suppress its activation. So that's another reason to include turmeric in your diet. So nutrient-poor foods, well, these are the ones that have got high glycemic index and are processed, that they usually lack nutrient density. These are foods like fast foods, sugar-sweetened soft drinks. They're rich in saturated fat, trans fats, omega-6 fatty acids, as you will recall. They're the inflammatory. They go down take the process down the inflammatory pathway to produce arachidonic acid. They're rich in sugar and advanced glycation end products. And you know what the consequences of all of those are. Alcohol, same thing. Even 1 or 2 drinks a day increase oxidative stress and inflammation. Caffeine, same thing. Both in low and high concentrations, they increase various inflammatory molecules and processes. And this vascular adhesion, cell adhesion molecule is the molecule that's on endothelial cells that allows the monocytes and oxidized LDL to come into the intima. So these are all increased in the presence of caffeine, even in low concentrations. And caffeine also decreases serum levels of anti-inflammatory cytokine IL-10. Not all cytokines are pro-inflammatory. There are the anti-inflammatory ones. And again, they are there to bring a balance back into the system. And smoking, well, it's bad all around, so we won't go into that at all. Now, as I said, the microbiome is very important in our health. Just last year, a study was published where participants were fed 20 grams a day more fiber than they were consuming at baseline, or 6 serves a day of fermented foods. And they were fed these over a 6-week period, followed by a 4-week period where the intake would be maintained as they desired. So for 6 weeks, they had to follow the dietary regime, and then for 4 weeks after, they could do what they want, but still in that group that they were originally in. Interestingly, microbial diversity did not change, in the high fiber group, but their microbiome encoded enzymes and short-chain fatty acids increased, as you would expect. Even more interesting is the response to the diet that followed 3 immune trajectories, depending on baseline microbiota diversity. And this is even despite consuming the same amount of fiber over a 6-week period. So those showing greater inflammation had increases in monocytes and T cells, but those in the low inflammation group had decreases in these. So depending on your baseline level, if you had high levels of inflammation to start with, or had low levels of diversity in your microbiome, you're more likely to develop inflammation. Whereas if you had greater microbial diversity to start with, then this high fiber diet reduced the inflammation in your body. So those showing greater inflammation had increases in monocytes and T cells, but those in the low inflammation group had decreases in these and greater microbial diversity, indicating that fiber is more effective in improving inflammation markers in individuals with greater microbial richness to start with. On the other hand, high fermented food diet increased microbial diversity, but the increased diversity did not come from the organisms in the food itself. But instead, the researchers postulated that the increased diversity came from either the environment, or more importantly, they were already present. The organisms were already present in the body in numbers too small to detect at baseline, but the fermented foods were able to increase these numbers, and they continued to do so even when the participants chose to, consume their level of fermented foods after the 6-week period. Also in this group, 19 markers of inflammation, including cytokines, chemokines, and other inflammatory proteins, also decreased. So there are actually benefits. There were benefits to consuming a high fiber diet, and there are benefits to consuming high fermented food. And the researchers postulated that a combination of both mechanisms would be advantageous in producing all of these beneficial reactions from in the microbiome. Now, moving on to lifestyle behaviours, we all know that physical activity and exercise is good for us, as it reduces type 2 diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, even anxiety, cognitive decline, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, colon cancer, and sarcopenia. It decreases all-cause mortality while increasing longevity and improving the quality of life in the elderly. Now, knowing that it has benefits for us in reducing all these diseases, it's interesting that acute bouts of exercise cause a transient increase in reactive oxygen levels, oxygen species levels. However, this seems to be compensated for by upregulating the antioxidant enzymes, decreasing markers of oxidative stress. So exercise in the first instance increases ROS, but then as time goes on throughout the day and the days after that, it will increase the total antioxidant status of the body, thereby protecting the body from free radicals throughout that day that exercise was conducted. So exercise decreases several pro-inflammatory cytokines and increases anti-inflammatory molecules. And exercise has been shown to produce an adaptive response whereby muscle fatigue upregulates repair proteins so that the muscle fibers improve force production and the functioning of the vascular endothelial cells is improved. So exercise, in other words, exercise, even though it produces fatigue, it actually makes the muscle fibers stronger and work better, and helps the endothelial cells of the blood vessels work harder because of this stress that exercise produces in the body and the adaptation that occurs as a result. Now, sleep. Poor sleep increases stress hormones, which increase the metabolic rate, which increase free radical damage. Both wakefulness, long periods of wakefulness and sleep deprivation both increase inflammation and decrease antioxidant enzymes. And obstructive sleep apnea is actually quite harmful because it also has negative effects on oxidative stress and inflammation through various mechanisms. Now, during the night, the brain secretes melatonin. And we know that melatonin is important to promote sleep and help with the timing of the circadian rhythm. But did you know that melatonin is at work during the day as well? And it works in the night, not only to promote sleep, but it works in the day and night as the main antioxidant system of the mitochondria. So how does it get into the mitochondria in the day? Because during the night, melatonin comes through the pineal gland, is produced from the lack of light stimulating the pineal gland, which increases the melatonin that the body makes. So looking at what happens in the daytime to produce melatonin, let's start by looking at sunlight. Visible light makes up about 40% of the light spectrum, while the UV portion is only a small part. Most of the light is in the infrared range, which we can't see. During the day, the light from the near infrared range from the sun penetrates deep into the body, even if you've got clothes on. So in order to produce vitamin D, UV light needs to hit the skin. But in order to produce melatonin, light from the near infrared range will pass through clothes and still reach the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, as we've said, that produces ATP. And the mitochondria also produces melatonin to counter the production of ROS that occurs during the respiration from as we respire oxygen. If this protective mechanism is not present, inflammation would ensue. At night, no light gets to the retina, And the pineal gland will release melatonin, which goes to the mitochondria to protect it. In the daytime, the near-infrared radiation increases melatonin production to put a dampener on ROS. So in the night, we get the pineal gland releasing melatonin, but in the day, we need sunlight to produce it. Near-infrared light is there from sunrise. So if you look at this, this is the near-infrared photons. It's right there from sunrise. It increases as the sun rises up in the sky and decreases again to diminish at sunset. UV rays are most intense between 10 and 2 in the middle of the day, as is the production of free radicals, also the greatest in the middle of the day. So we need to protect ourselves from the sun if the UV index is above 3. At the beginning of the day, if you actually go out into the sun, you build up the melatonin in your mitochondria, which prepares you for the bombardment of UV radiation in the middle of the day. And also is there to repair the damage afterwards. So this melatonin that's produced in the morning is also there at the end of the day to repair any damage that's done by this UV radiation. Our bodies are geared to protect us from UV radiation present. But we do, as I said, we do need that UV radiation in order to make vitamin D. So if you're not getting enough sunlight during the day and sleep at night, then that system is already running hot with reactive oxygen species and inflammation. The trouble with modern societies is that we're indoors most of the time and we're not exposed as much to this near-infrared radiation. And the light globes that we have got in our homes at the moment, these LED lights, are the light that is produced is 100% visible light only. The old incandescent lights were able to produce some orange light, but these modern LED lights are 100% blue light. So things have changed since early days when we were working outside in the fields, exposed to a lot of near-infrared radiation. And then as time has progressed and we have become, we tend to work indoors, spend times in cars, going from indoor to indoor activity, we are being exposed to less and less of this near-infrared radiation, which is important to protect us from this oxidative damage that occurs in our bodies through the production of melatonin. So the health reformer of the last century actually made a couple of statements relating to this. She said, "Go out into the light and warmth of the glorious sun, you pale and sickly ones, and share with vegetation its life-giving, health-dealing power. Make it a habit not to sit up after 9 o'clock, because this is when melatonin is produced around the 9 o'clock time frame. Every light should be extinguished, because we now know that light, especially this blue light from LED globes and blue light from computer screens and smartphones and iPads and so forth, actually reduces the amount of melatonin that's produced in the body. This turning of night into day is a wretched, health-destroying habit. If only we'd recognise that these days. And then there's stress, anxiety, and depression, which can contribute to the production of inflammation and oxidative stress. Now, mild anxiety is a normal physiological response, and mild anxiety and stress can actually make the body more resilient. It's when this stress and anxiety gets out of control that these are implicated with psychiatric disorders, in particular depression. So we've seen that an unhealthy lifestyle through various mechanisms can gradually shift the body's redox balance towards a state of oxidative stress, the primary driver of chronic disease. This oxidative stress produces subclinical damage to cells, tissues, and organs. Now, if this unhealthy lifestyle continues, if it persists, the resulting biochemical adaptation will, over time, drive the body to a state of pathology and disease. You can see this also in this diagram. You can have a person who is healthy and free of disease processes. Through the process of oxidative stress and inflammation, it produces a state of chronic oxidative stress and inflammation. If this is sustained, tissue remodeling will occur. Clinical symptoms of these chronic diseases will happen. And then when disease happens, medical intervention will need to occur in order to address this state. But this, unfortunately, this medical intervention never really addresses the state and brings it back to here, which is where lifestyle plays a role. So how do we ameliorate oxidative stress and inflammation? Well, firstly, we remove or minimize the things that promote oxidative stress and inflammation. Secondly, we add elements that increase antioxidant defense, such as the food we eat, the healthy food, the plant-based foods, which are rich in phytonutrients and all of the things that protect us from the oxidative onslaught that we can experience. Exercise is important, and we've seen that sleep is important through the production of melatonin, that potent antioxidant. And then to encourage habits that facilitate DNA cell repair, things like fasting, hot and cold treatments, water treatments, hot and cold showers, and saunas help to make the body more resilient and to repair more easily after damage can occur or has occurred. Now, just a word on antioxidant supplements. Don't recommend them. We should be getting our antioxidants from whole plant foods. Now, just just 3 examples here of how they can have a detrimental effect. So we know that the inflammatory response is critical in infections with infections from intracellular pathogens. If we are to, however, intervene with antioxidants and anti-inflammatories too early, too aggressively, or too long term, we can actually lower the immune system's ability to combat infections and even exacerbate or extend the symptoms. So we really need to allow the body to do its natural functions. And the way to do this is not to feed it antioxidants and anti-inflammatories from a bottle. It's to feed it the mechanisms, as we saw in the previous slide, the mechanisms to allow the oxidants to be and anti-inflammatories to be reduced. As we've discussed, physical exercise produces a transient increase in reactive oxygen species, which then induces the genes involved in endogenous reactive oxygen species defense to increase mitochondrial performance. So in other words, the exercise increases the ability of the mitochondria to perform its function to reduce disease. But antioxidants in supplement form, such as in vitamin E and C, suppress the body's natural adaptation and generation of new mitochondria and response to oxidative stress. So supplements can affect the mitochondria to produce it to work its best. And thirdly, another example is taking high concentrations of long-chain fatty acids if there is an existing pro-oxidant environment, because this just fans the flames. These omega-3 fatty acids are readily oxidized. So when they're oxidized, they generate lipid radicals, which then steal electrons from other molecules, creating more and more radicals. So you really need to know the condition of your body when you're taking, if you're wanting to take any antioxidants. And as I said, the safest way is to consume foods that already have them in them. Because these whole foods come packaged with all of these nutrients. And these work together synergistically to boost the overall ability of the body to protect from oxidative stress and inflammation. So if you think you can take an antioxidant and then eat what you like and expect it to become like a broccoli or to protect you from disease, it just ain't going to happen. So that brings me to the end of this presentation, and I thank you for your attention.
Hello, I think I'm back on here. Actually, Lil, if you can just stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
There we go. Beautiful. Hey, well, everyone, that's like, I hope that you memorized every word that was said just then, because, you know, very easy stuff to digest. Look, there are a heap of things that I could even ask about that, Lil, and it obviously covered a massive amount of territory. I sat up particularly when you started talking about aging effects and how, you know, how you look on the outside is probably indicative of how young you are on the inside, which made me think, you know, a couple of years ago when I turned 70, hey, look, we obviously we've had a good session, and there were some questions, but for the class, they'll have opportunities to ask them.
Yeah. Just ask the questions during the class, and we'll address it there. Yeah. Okay.
Because I realise you've got to run too. So anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thanks, Lil, for the presentation. Fascinating there.
Yeah.
New insights. Great stuff. See you all later.